Hello, this is John Burroughs again. I'm going to continue with my autobiography, 7 Years to Life, and this is chapter 58, and it's called The Good, Bad, and the Ugly. Most of you recognize the title of the story as the same title of a Clint Eastwood movie. Hal deserves a story in this book, not only because of the fact that he was a pretty complex man, but he also encompasses all the traits of the title. There are hundreds of stories regarding Hal, but choosing the right ones could be a lifelong undertaking. So I decided to combine 3 stories into one as an example why the title is the perfect fit. I have decided to reverse the order because I prefer to end the story with the things or actions that made Hal a good person. I will begin with the ugly. It did not take long for Hal and I to become close friends, because the things that tortured me the most were almost exact carbon copies of what plagued Hal the most. When it came to the ugly part, and I don't mean our physical experience, it more aptly described behavioral traits that Hal possessed that caused a type of behavior that was the thing that I deployed about Hal the most. I told you before about Hal's standards when it came to women that he considered effable. The only bright spot in Hal's way of thinking about women is that he would bed was the fact that he completely did not include minors as targets. And honestly, to this day, I don't know if he feared the penalties given for sex with a minor or if he truly felt it was wrong. I have to tell you about Linda, presumably his girlfriend that he lived with for many years. Linda was Hal's age, and she must have loved him deeply because he would constantly demean her in public or in her own home where Hal lived rent-free. When she would visit him at the station, he would constantly tell her to leave and not to bother him at work, even though employees' girlfriends and wives would visit often, and Russ did not mind it at all, as long as we were not swamped with work. I used to think it was because Linda was somewhat frumpy and not especially attractive, and Hal felt in some way it took away from his reputation. That perception changed when Hal decided to have a Super Bowl party at Linda's house. It was the year that the Raiders, a wild card team with Jim Plunkett at quarterback, beat the Vikings. During that party, it was impossible to ignore that Hal treated Linda like she was the hired help, and her embarrassment was obvious. If you added this to the fact that he berated her in public and constantly cheated on her, you begin to feel embarrassed right along with her. I don't know if this was part of the biker culture or not, but it did not dismiss the fact that it was disgusting and ugly. Linda was a kind yet strong woman, and I knew it was only a matter of time before she kicked him out of her house and removed him from her life. It took much longer than I expected, but when it finally occurred, I was happy for Linda, and I told Hal that. I can't help believe that at some point in Hal's future, he realized that it might have been the worst mistake he ever made. Now let me delve into what bad means in relation to this story. This is where Hal and I shared a common enemy that nearly killed us a few times. We were not bad, such as a bank robber or rapist would be considered bad, but bad was just another way of saying that we were really tough. At least the people that knew us best thought so. The real truth is we both had severe anger management issues that once ignited became explosive. After going drinking at the bar several times, I witnessed the same problems that I had. In fact, there were a number of times where I watched Hal become frustrated. I noticed that frustration morph into extremely uncomfortable irritation. The irritation over a matter of minutes would turn into outright anger that triggered uncontrollable rage that most of the time culminated in a fist fight, usually with someone that was a formidable opponent. It would end with 2 badly beaten, battered, and bruised men. One of them had a smile on his face, and the other person walking away disgusted with himself after having been lured into the fight in the first place. The person with the smile on his face was always the one that wanted to continue fighting, and that person was Hal. It did not matter what the frustration that started the process was. All that mattered to Hal was the release it provided him. It did not matter either who his opponent was. It was primal therapy, pure and simple. Those parts of our personality are carbon copies of each other's from start to finish. It was like watching myself in the mirror. Thus it begged the question that when two individuals had explosive anger management issues and relieved their rage in the exact same way, what would happen if those two individuals fought each other in the grip of uncontrollable rage? That was one question, and the other question that came from those who knew us best. What if the two people were Hal and Paul, and who would win? The answer came on a chilly November night in 1977. Hal and I were at the gas station pounding down whiskey like you would drink ice-cold beer one after another on a hot, humid, sunny day. It would be an obvious understatement to say we were getting blitzed. We were doing this to pass the spare time that we had before I had to pick up Georgia at her job at the Hungarian restaurant. There were a few times in my life where I can honestly state that I was more inebriated than I was on that night, but not many. Hal and I arrived at the restaurant in my little yellow Volkswagen. When Georgia came out, Hal hopped out of the passenger seat and sat back down in the middle of the back seat. I took off, driving towards our apartment. After a few miles had passed under the wheels of the car, I heard Hal say to me in a distinctively drunken voice, "Harrington," instead of Paco, "you're nothing but a pussy." I knew instinctively that Hal was angry and looking for trouble, but I was drunk as hell also, so I just said to him, "Shut your effing mouth back there and be quiet." I was driving and I was not angry. I was trying not to get pulled over by the police. All that changed faster than the blink of an eye when I felt Hal's right fist smashed me in the side of the face while I was driving, leaving me essentially helpless. As far as my mood was concerned, I went from feeling pretty mellow to a blind rage as we drove into a parking spot in my apartment complex. It was all out war now, and I hopped out of the driver's seat faster than a stunt in one of Jackie Chan's movies. The fight began in the parking area, continued on the stairs that led to my apartment door, and into my apartment, and the only onlooker was Georgia, and she knew it would end in blood and injury. The apartment manager who lived below me, and he was not home. Otherwise, I am reasonably positive the police would have arrived in minutes. This battle had been a long time coming, and admittedly, we were immersed in the primal therapy that, due to our inability to control our rage, we both needed so desperately. It is embarrassing to say that Georgia was too frightened to call the police because she knew that I would never forget her interfering with something that had to be played out. We fought for at least an hour, truly intending to do the other damage, and damage we did. We both incurred injuries that probably needed medical attention, but that held no concern for us whatsoever. I could write another paragraph detailing the injuries we both suffered, but that would not serve any positive purpose. The bottom line is the victor was drunken exhaustion that eventually overcame both of us. When two people share the same psychological condition, such as what Hal and I shared, that exhaustion probably saved one of our lives, if not both. We both passed out in our shell uniforms that we had never changed out of. The alarm rang us awake the next morning, and our sense of duty and love of 42nd Avenue Shell, and Russ in particular, overcame any sense of concern we had for ourselves. Georgia was no longer there, but my car was, and in torn and bloody uniforms, not caring about personal hygiene, we hopped into my car and arrived at the station about 25 minutes later. We walked into the station when Russ saw us, and he asked, "Who won?" We both pointed at each other, and Russ laughed and said, "I hope you two have finally got this obsession out of your system." Our reply was the universal shrug of the shoulders, along with the bewildered look on our faces that silently inferred that we did not know. We were calm, bruised, and battered, but both of us languished in the release that the night before had provided. Russ told us to put on clean uniforms, throw some water on our faces, and be prepared to work on the tire mounting machine the entire day. He did not want us near any of our good customers. He would handle those duties by himself. The other employees all lamented over the fact that they had been unable to witness the historic battle. Georgia drove up later that day with Leslie and said she had been terrified and disgusted by the whole incident, and that the both of us should seriously consider getting some type of therapy for our problem. We never did get the therapy, but we did get the necessary professional physical examination, cleansing of our wounds and stitches that would help prevent infection and scarring that could potentially occur. This whole thing brought us closer to each other, and there was an unspoken respect that lasted as long as Hal was part of my life. I think about that night often, and as usual, I try to understand what my thought process was at that stage of my life. Excuse me. I have yet to discover what it was, other than the need for release from a rage that would grip me that I could not control. I often see and feel that rage in many of the mixed martial arts fighters that I watch today. The difference that I see today is that when Hal and I fought, we were not looking for fame and fortune, just the release. It is different today and more troubling that this type of brutal release of rage is that the participants do not understand how wrong it is doing what they do, and that is because they become famous, make decent amounts of money with the opportunity to make a lot more through movies and commercials, but they are adored because of the way they can dispatch another human being so violently. Therapy is not even considered because today's sports fans validate their behavior. I love all types of sports and must admit that early on the whole concept of cage fighting was intriguing to watch because there is a dedication and skill development that when witnessed without empathy is exciting. In the end, however, the only difference between modern cage fighting and the ancient gladiatorial games is that in ancient times people would come to watch genuinely, hoping to witness a murder for their pleasure, and in today's arenas there are referees and doctors in and out of the ring whose sole purpose is to see that the loser sustains as little damage as possible. Most alarmingly, more women are participating in cage fighting than any other time in history. Hal was a decent man. Hal was a kind man. Hal was a good man. I know that I have now currently confused you. You probably think I'm writing about a completely different guy whose name also happened to be Hal. I assure you that I am not. The things that I have just written about Hal I either witnessed for myself or was a part of. This is also true in what you are about to learn about Hal's good side. Hal was the station's former service manager, and I was the present service manager. I never viewed Hal as my employee or my subordinate, and thankfully Hal never viewed me as his manager or his boss. I can honestly say we never envied each other, and we always respected each other. The reason I mention this is because I was responsible for various decisions and also accountable for them. I was recognized for the good decisions that I made and was equally admonished for the bad decisions. The truth of the matter is that regardless of the importance of any decision I had to make, I always sought Hal's advice, and 99% of the time Hal's advice was sound and rooted in knowledge and logic. Russ's son, Greg, who was a brilliant young man, had been our closer while he was going to college at the University of California in Santa Cruz, and his brother Ken, who was a hard-working, good-looking heartthrob type of a guy, shared the closing responsibilities with Greg. The closing shift was 2 p.m. to 12 a.m., Monday through Saturday. On Sundays, we closed at 6 p.m., and we had 2 employees that would work the Sunday shift that began at 8. Greg and Ken would rotate the closing shifts on a regular basis in order for each of them to get every other Saturday off. Additionally, there was a 12 p.m. to 10 p.m. shift, so the closer had someone with him until 10 p.m., but after that the closer worked alone because the business would dramatically drop off. One day, Russ called me into the back office to tell me that Greg and Ken were no longer going to be able to be the closers, meaning that I had to find other people to fill the position. I consulted with Hal, and we both knew that the closing position was the least popular and the hardest to fill in the service station business. We decided it would be more beneficial to have one closer because that guy would be hard enough, much less finding two people. We had 2 weeks to find the guy. We put an ad in the paper, and it took about 3 days before we had some applicants. There was not a single one in the bunch that either of us felt comfortable in hiring because there were some basic qualifications that we were looking for. Then one day in walks this kid with long hair wearing a Metallica or Black Sabbath t-shirt. I can't remember which, faded and torn jeans and a demeanor that he indicated he might have some challenges. Hearing him speak, that confirmed that he did have some challenges. You could understand him, but his age surpassed his mental capabilities. I have to admit that his personality was one that cried for acceptance, and his appearance substantiated this. He wanted to be cool like his friends of the same age. I liked the kid. However, I was just about to tell him the position was filled when Hal popped up from checking a spare tire in the trunk of a customer's car. When he reached over and put his arm around Nick and said, "Nick, is it?" Nick had a one-word reply that was, "Yeah." Hal posed some questions, all the while having his arm around Nick. "Can you add and subtract correctly?" "Yeah." "Do you know how to pump gas, wash windows, check oil levels, and check air in the tires?" Nick said, "That's what I am applying for, right?" I stifled a laugh when I heard this. Hal said just a few more questions. "Do you know how to cheerfully say, 'How are you?' and 'thank you'?" Nick went right back to, "Yeah." "Okay, last question, Nick. Do you like pussy?" Nick never seemed intimidated by Hal, and believe me, that was unusual. Then came Nick's answers that caused me to spit out the soda I was drinking. Nick looked at Hal, perplexed, and said, "Why don't you?" Hal then told Nick to wait a minute while he had a conversation with me. Hal told me I had to hire this kid. Empathy was pouring out of every pore in Hal's body. The next thing Hal said blew my mind. It was something from deep down inside Hal that I did not know existed. He said pleadingly, "Paco, hire this kid. For kids like him, this is a rare opportunity that may never come his way again. I promise I will watch over him, and besides, two assholes like us could teach him about life the right way, and I could use a few points with the motherfucker upstairs." Hal's case was compelling, so I hired Nick. Hal kept his promise. He trained Nick personally and told him when to start his closing routine at night, and when we were sure he could handle it, we congratulated him on being a member of the 42nd Avenue Shell team. It seems that as if this was the proudest moment of Nick's life. I gave him my phone number and told him that I only live a couple of minutes away if he had a problem. That was probably unnecessary because 42nd Avenue Shell was my home away from home, as it was Hal's, and on duty or off, one of us both knew we were usually there drinking, smoking pot, and doing lines in the back office. Nick knew this, but he didn't care. He was part of the team. I will never forget the night that Hal and I were hanging out in the back office around 10:30 p.m. when these two frat boy types pulled right up to the waiting room. There was a soda machine in there along with a two-way mirror. These guys asked Nick for change, and when they realized he was slightly handicapped, they started flinging insults at him. Nick had been around Hal and I too long, and Nick started flinging a few insults of his own. You can see the embarrassment written all over one of the frat boys' faces. I started to get out of my chair, and Hal grabbed me because he wanted to see how the situation played out. But when they started shoving Nick around between them, that was all Hal could take. He charged out of the office and went right at them. The frat boys were totally frozen by shock and fear. Feel free to use your imagination about how this conflict ended. The only hint I will give you is that what followed was not pretty. Formulate your own opinion about this good, bad, and ugly man, But in my opinion, the ugly and the bad was more false bravado than it was real. As I am still in the process of conquering my demons, I sincerely hope Hal is still alive and conquered his, but the goodness that he displayed with Nick will always be in the forefront of my memories about Hal.